Yo, real talk, you ever notice how the loudest person in the room is usually hiding the deepest pain? That's straight up Naruto Uzumaki, dude. Like, for real. Everyone sees this kid with the biggest smile, cracking jokes, pulling pranks, acting hella extra, right? But here's the thing that's absolutely wild: that smile, that laugh, that whole believe it energy. It was literally a mask covering a void so dark, so empty, that it almost destroyed everything he ever loved. And I'm not talking about some surface-level sad backstory, nah. We're diving into the psychology behind why Naruto's pain was so dangerous, not just to himself but to the entire shinobi world. See, most people think Naruto's story is about a kid who never gave up. And yeah, that's part of it. But what they miss is the terrifying truth. The emptiness inside him wasn't just loneliness, it was a psychological time bomb that could have turned him into the very monster everyone feared he was. The village rejected him, isolated him, treated him like trash, and that kind of trauma? It doesn't just go away because you smile harder. It festers. It grows. And for Naruto, it nearly consumed everything. So buckle up, because what we're about to unpack is gonna hit different. Before we go deeper into this psychological rabbit hole, do me a solid real quick, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. What? Because if you're vibing with this deep dive into how Naruto's hidden void almost destroyed everything, then you're gonna want more of this type of content. We break down the psychology behind your favorite anime characters in ways that'll make you see them completely different. Plus, by subscribing, you're telling YouTube you want this kind of real talk analysis in your feed, and honestly, we're building a community of people who get it, who understand that anime isn't just entertainment, it's a mirror to our own struggles. So yeah, subscribe, drop a like, and let's keep this conversation going, because what's coming next is gonna blow your mind. Alright, let's get into it. To understand why Naruto's emptiness was so catastrophic, we gotta talk about something psychologists call attachment theory, and trust me, this is where things get crazy deep. When you're a kid, like a little baby, you need connection. It's not just about food or shelter, it's about emotional bonds. Your brain is literally wired to seek out love, validation, and a sense of belonging. Without that, your whole development gets messed up. And Naruto? He had none of that. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Think about it, from the moment he was born he was marked. The Nine Tails, that massive fox demon, was sealed inside him, and instead of the village seeing him as the hero's son, as the kid who saved them, they saw him as the monster itself. That's straight-up psychological projection, where people take their fear and pain and throw it onto someone else. The villagers couldn't deal with their trauma from the Nine Tails attack, so they made Naruto the scapegoat. And here's the kicker, Naruto didn't even know why. Imagine being a little kid, maybe 4 or 5 years old, walking through your village and people look at you with disgust. They whisper when you pass by. Store owners refuse to serve you. Parents pull their children away from you like you're diseased. And you have no idea why. You didn't do anything wrong. You're just existing. But everyone treats you like you're the worst thing that ever happened to them. That kind of rejection, especially during critical developmental years, creates what's called a core wound. It's this deep psychological injury that shapes everything about how you see yourself in the world. For Naruto, that core wound was abandonment and worthlessness. His brain, trying to make sense of why everyone hated him, came to one conclusion: there must be something fundamentally wrong with me. Not with them, with me. And that's the trap. When you're rejected that consistently, that intensely, you internalize it. You start believing you deserve it. Now here's where the smile comes in, and this is gonna hit you. Naruto's loud, obnoxious, prankster personality? That wasn't who he really was. That was a defense mechanism, what psychologists call a compensatory behavior. He was so desperate for attention, any attention, that he'd rather be yelled at, chased, punished, than be invisible. Because being invisible meant being forgotten, and being forgotten meant he didn't exist at all. The pranks, the jokes, the big declarations, they were all saying, look at me, see me, acknowledge that I'm here. It's the same reason he painted the Hokage faces. He wanted to force the village to see him, even if they saw him as a nuisance. Negative attention was better than no attention. And that smile? That big, bright, never-give-up smile? That was armor. Pure psychological armor. Because if he let the mask slip, if he showed how much pain he was really in, he'd have to face the unbearable truth that he was completely, utterly alone. But here's what makes this even more devastating. Naruto didn't just want attention. He wanted validation. He wanted someone, anyone, to tell him he mattered, that he had value, that he deserved to exist. And the village refused to give him that. So he made a promise to himself: if they won't acknowledge me as I am, I'll become someone they have to acknowledge. I'll become Hokage. And boom, that became his entire identity. His whole reason for living. But here's the psychological trap: He wasn't chasing the role of Hokage because he genuinely wanted to lead. He was chasing it because he thought it would finally fill that void. He thought if he became Hokage, the village would finally love him, finally accept him, finally see him as human. He was trying to earn love, and that's a dangerous game. Because love that has to be earned isn't really love, it's a transaction. And deep down Naruto knew that. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how many missions he completed or how strong he became, there was always going to be that voice in his head whispering, "You're not enough, you'll never be enough, you're still that lonely kid nobody wanted." And here's where it gets real, this kind of emotional starvation, this chronic lack of validation and connection. It doesn't just make you sad. It fundamentally changes your brain chemistry. Studies show that prolonged isolation and rejection actually alter the structure of the brain, particularly in areas related to emotional regulation and impulse control. It creates what's called emotional dysregulation, where you can't properly process or manage your feelings. You swing between extremes. You're either numb or you're overwhelmed. There's no middle ground. For Naruto, this manifested in his recklessness. He'd throw himself into dangerous situations without thinking. He'd make impulsive decisions. He'd push himself to the brink of death because on some level he didn't value his own life. Why would he? Nobody else did. And here's the really scary part, that void inside him, that emptiness, it created a perfect breeding ground for the Nine Tails to manipulate him. The fox wasn't just a source of power, it was a reflection of everything Naruto was trying to suppress. The rage, the hatred, the desire to lash out at a world that hurt him. Every time Naruto felt rejected, every time he felt powerless, every time that void got a little bigger, the Nine Tails got a little stronger. Because the fox fed on negative emotions. It fed on pain. And Naruto had an endless supply. Now let's talk about what happens when that mask starts cracking, because it did crack multiple times, and each time it was absolutely terrifying. See, you can only suppress pain for so long before it erupts, and for Naruto those eruptions were catastrophic. The first major crack we see is during the fight with Haku and Zabuza. When Naruto thought Sasuke was dead, something inside him broke. Like, completely shattered. And for the first time, we see what's really living underneath that smile, pure, unfiltered rage. The Nine Tails chakra explodes out of him, his eyes turn red, and he becomes something else entirely. Something feral. Something terrifying. And here's what's wild from a psychological perspective. That wasn't the Nine Tails taking over. That was Naruto's suppressed emotions finally being released. The fox was just amplifying what was already there. All that accumulated pain, all that rejection, all that loneliness, it had been building up like pressure in a volcano, and Sasuke's apparent death was the catalyst that made it erupt. In that moment, Naruto wasn't thinking. He wasn't the optimistic kid with the bright smile. He was a wounded animal lashing out at anything that threatened what little connection he had. Because Sasuke, whether Naruto fully understood it or not, was one of the first people who saw him. Not as the Nine Tails. Not as a nuisance. But as a rival. As someone worth acknowledging. And the thought of losing one of the only people who made him feel like he existed, it unlocked something dark inside him. But here's where it gets even deeper, that darkness? It scared Naruto. Like, genuinely terrified him. Because in that moment of rage he felt powerful, but he also felt out of control. He felt like the monster everyone said he was. And that's the psychological trap that almost destroyed him, the fear that maybe they were right. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with him. Maybe he was dangerous. Maybe he didn't deserve connection because he'd only end up hurting people. This is what's called intrusive thoughts in psychology, where your brain feeds you these horrible ideas that feel true even though they're not. And for someone with Naruto's level of trauma, those thoughts were constant. What if I lose control? What if I hurt my friends? What if I'm actually the monster they think I am? And every time he tapped into the Nine Tails' power, those thoughts got louder. Every time he felt that rage bubbling up, he'd panic internally because it confirmed his worst fear, that the village was right to reject him. Now let's fast forward to the Chunin exams and the fight with Neji. On the surface this looks like Naruto proving everyone wrong, showing that hard work beats natural talent, all that good stuff. But if you look deeper, this fight was about something way more personal. Neji was talking about fate, about how your life is predetermined, how you can't escape what you were born into. And for Naruto, that hit different because that's exactly what the village had been telling him his whole life. You're the Nine Tails container. You're cursed. You're destined to be hated. That's your fate. Accept it. And Naruto's whole speech about changing fate, about proving destiny wrong? That wasn't just motivational talk. That was him fighting against his own intrusive thoughts. He was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince Neji. Because deep down there was a part of him that believed maybe fate was real. Maybe he was destined to be alone. Maybe no amount of effort would change how people saw him. But he couldn't accept that. He refused to accept that. Because if fate was real, if he couldn't change his destiny, then all the pain he'd endured was meaningless. All the fighting, all the struggling, all the smiling through the tears, it would all be for nothing. So he fought Niji with everything he had, not just to win the match, but to prove to himself that he had control over his life. That he wasn't trapped. That he could change the narrative. But here's the tragic part, even after winning, even after proving himself, that void was still there. The village still saw him the same way. He still went home to an empty apartment. He still had that voice in his head telling him he wasn't enough. Victory didn't fill the emptiness. It just distracted him from it temporarily. Then we get to the hospital rooftop scene with Sasuke, and oh man, this is where things really start spiraling. Sasuke, the person Naruto considered his closest friend, his brother, tells him he doesn't understand pain because he never had a family to lose. And that wrecked Naruto. Like absolutely destroyed him. Because what Sasuke said, intentionally or not, was you're too broken to even understand real loss. Your pain doesn't count. And for someone whose entire existence had been invalidated by everyone around him, hearing that from the one person he thought understood him, that pushed him to a breaking point. The fight that follows isn't just about rivalry or proving who's stronger. It's about Naruto desperately trying to validate his own suffering. He's screaming, "I hurt too, my pain is real, I matter, please see me." And when Sasuke activates the Chidori, when he's fully prepared to kill Naruto, something inside Naruto snaps. The Nine Tails takes over again, but this time it's different. This time Naruto almost welcomes it. Because in that moment, the pain of rejection was so overwhelming that becoming the monster felt easier than staying human. Let's talk about what's happening in his brain during these moments. When trauma is triggered, when emotional pain reaches critical levels, the amygdala, that's the fear center of your brain, it goes into overdrive. It triggers your fight or flight response. But for Naruto there was a third option, the Nine Tails. The fox represented an escape from the unbearable weight of his emotions. Every time the pain got too intense, every time he felt that void expanding, the Nine Tails offered power, numbness, a way to stop feeling so much. And that's insanely dangerous because it's basically the same mechanism as addiction. When reality is too painful, you reach for something that makes it stop hurting, even if that something is destructive. For Naruto, the Nine Tails was his drug. It was his way of checking out from the emotional agony. And the more he used it, the easier it became to justify using it again. Just this once. Just to get through this fight. Just to prove I'm not weak. But each time he tapped into that power, he was reinforcing the idea that he couldn't handle his emotions on his own. That he needed the monster inside him to survive. Now here's where it almost destroyed everything, during Sasuke's retrieval arc. When Naruto is fighting Sasuke in the Valley of the End, he makes a choice that could have ended catastrophically. He lets the Nine Tails take over completely. He goes full Four Tails transformation, and in that state he's not Naruto anymore. He's a mindless beast. He attacks Sasuke with killing intent. He doesn't recognize friend from foe. He's completely consumed by rage and pain. And when he snaps out of it, when he sees what he's done, the destruction he's caused, he's horrified. Because in that moment he became exactly what everyone feared. He proved them right. And that realization, that gut-wrenching realization that he lost control, that he almost killed his best friend, that he couldn't trust himself, it created a new layer of trauma on top of everything else. Now he wasn't just fighting the village's perception of him. He was fighting his own perception of himself. He couldn't even trust his own mind, his own emotions. Because what if next time he can't come back? What if next time he hurts someone he loves and can't stop it? This is what psychologists call a fractured sense of self. When you can't trust your own thoughts, emotions, or actions, you start to dissociate. You start to feel disconnected from yourself. And for Naruto, that disconnection was terrifying because his whole identity was built on never giving up, always pushing forward, always believing in himself. But how do you believe in yourself when you don't even know who you are anymore? When the line between you and the monster inside you starts to blur. After Sasuke leaves, after Naruto fails to bring him back, the void gets even bigger. Because now he's not just dealing with rejection from the village. He's dealing with the rejection from the person who mattered most to him. Sasuke chose revenge over their bond. He chose darkness over their friendship. And for Naruto, that was confirmation of his deepest fear. I'm not enough to save anyone. I'm not strong enough. I'm not important enough. People will always leave me. And that kind of abandonment, especially from someone you consider family, it doesn't just hurt. It fundamentally alters how you view relationships. It makes you terrified of getting close to people because what if they leave too? What if I care about them and they decide I'm not worth staying for? So Naruto does what he's always done, he throws himself into training. He leaves with Jiraiya for 3 years, pushing himself to become stronger, believing that if he's just strong enough, powerful enough, important enough, people will stay. People will choose him. But here's the tragic irony, he's still trying to earn love. He's still stuck in that same psychological trap from childhood. He still believes his worth is conditional, that he has to prove he deserves to exist. And that void, that emptiness, it's still there, growing quieter maybe, but never gone. Just waiting for the next trigger. The next rejection. The next moment where the mask slips and he has to face the unbearable truth that no amount of strength or achievement can fill the hole left by a childhood without love. Hey, real quick, what are you thinking right now? Like, seriously, drop a comment below and tell me what's hitting you the hardest about Naruto's story. Have you ever felt like you had to hide your pain behind a smile? Do you know someone who's going through this? Someone who's always cheerful but you can tell something's not right underneath? Maybe you've been that person. Maybe you are that person right now. Share your story with us because this community gets it. We understand that struggle. And honestly, your comment helps me keep making content like this for you. It tells me this matters, that these deep dives are connecting with people who need them. So yeah, drop that comment. Let's talk about it. Stick with me until the end though, because what I'm about to reveal next is the moment where everything could have been lost forever. The point where Naruto almost completely gave in to that darkness. You don't want to miss this. Alright, here's where everything reaches the breaking point. We're talking about the pain arc, and specifically, the moment where Naruto comes face to face with the absolute worst version of what he could become. When Jiraiya dies, when his mentor, his father figure, the one person who truly saw him and believed in him unconditionally, gets killed by pain, something inside Naruto shatters in a way that can't be put back together the same way. This wasn't just loss. This was the destruction of his anchor. Jiraiya was the person who told him his life had meaning, who saw potential in him when nobody else did, who gave him hope that he could change the world. And now he's gone. Ripped away. And Naruto couldn't save him. Couldn't even be there when it happened. That guilt, that grief, it was suffocating. But here's where the psychology gets absolutely wild. Naruto doesn't have time to process it. He doesn't get to sit with that pain and work through it in a healthy way. Instead, he has to immediately go into battle mode because pain is attacking the village. The same village that rejected him his whole life. And he's expected to save them. Think about the psychological complexity of that moment. He's grieving the loss of the only person who ever made him feel like family, and simultaneously, he's being asked to risk his life for people who've treated him like garbage. And you know what? He does it. Because that's who Naruto is. That's the mask he's built. The hero who saves everyone no matter what. But during that fight with pain, we see the mask completely disintegrate. When pain destroys the village, when Naruto sees everyone he knows hurt or dead, when he's pushed to his absolute limit, he makes a choice. He gives in to the Nine Tails. Completely. And this time, it's not a moment of losing control. It's a conscious decision. He looks at the devastation, looks at pain standing there talking about cycles of hatred and revenge, and Naruto thinks, screw it, if the world wants a monster, I'll give them a monster. And he goes 6 tails. Then 8 tails. And it's horrifying. His skin peels off. His blood boils. He becomes this skeletal, demonic thing that's more 9 tails than human. And in that form, he's not thinking about saving anyone. He's not thinking about peace or understanding. He's pure destruction. Pure rage. All the pain he's been suppressing for his entire life, it all comes pouring out at once. And here's the critical moment that almost destroyed everything. He nearly breaks the seal. He nearly releases the Nine Tails completely. If that had happened, game over. The fox would have destroyed everything. Everyone would have died. The entire shinobi world would have been annihilated. And it would have been Naruto's fault. The village's worst fear, that he was a ticking time bomb, would have been proven true. But what stops him isn't his own willpower. It's not his determination or his ninja way. It's his dad. The 4th Hokage, Minato, appears in his subconscious and literally has to hold him back. And this scene, this conversation, is where we see just how close Naruto was to giving up on everything. When Minato asks him to stop, to regain control, Naruto breaks down. Like, completely breaks down. The mask is gone. The smile is gone. The optimism is gone. And what's left is a terrified, broken kid screaming, I can't do this anymore. I'm not strong enough. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of fighting. Everyone leaves. Everyone dies. What's the point? This is the void fully exposed. This is Naruto at his absolute lowest. And what makes this moment so psychologically profound is that he's not just talking to his dad. He's talking to himself. He's finally admitting what he's been denying his whole life, that he's been drowning, that the weight of everything has been crushing him, that he's been one bad day away from completely giving up. Minato's response is crucial. He doesn't give Naruto some motivational speech about never giving up. He doesn't tell him to be stronger or to push through the pain. Instead, he acknowledges it. He says, "I know it's hard. I know you're suffering. I know this weight is unbearable." And then he says something that changes everything: "You don't have to carry this alone." This is the first time in Naruto's life that someone has validated his pain without trying to fix him or dismiss his feelings. Minato doesn't tell him to smile through it. He tells him it's okay to struggle. It's okay to need help. And that moment of validation, that simple act of being seen in his brokenness without judgment, it gives Naruto something he's never had before: permission to be human. Permission to not be okay. Permission to share the burden instead of carrying everything by himself. And this is where the psychological shift happens. Naruto realizes that his strength doesn't come from suppressing his pain or pretending it doesn't exist. His real strength comes from acknowledging it and choosing to keep going anyway. Not because he has to prove something to the village. Not because he's trying to earn love. But because he genuinely wants to break the cycle. He wants to create a world where kids like him don't have to grow up in that kind of pain. When he goes back to fight pain after that conversation, he's different. He's not fighting out of rage or desperation. He's fighting with clarity. With purpose. And when he defeats pain, when Nagato is lying there dying, Naruto does something that nobody expected. He forgives him. He understands him. Because Naruto recognizes that pain, that Nagato, is just another version of himself. Another kid whose life was destroyed by the shinobi system, who turned his pain into hatred, who became the monster the world feared. And Naruto sees that if things had gone just slightly differently, if he hadn't met Iruka or Kakashi or Jiraiya, he could have ended up exactly the same way. That realization that he was always one bad choice away from becoming pain, it's both terrifying and liberating. Because it means his path wasn't inevitable. He wasn't destined to be a hero or a villain. He chose. Every day, despite the pain, despite the void, despite the nine tails whispering in his ear, he chose to keep trying. To keep believing in something better. But here's what's crucial to understand: this moment doesn't fix him. It doesn't erase the trauma. The void is still there. The pain is still there. What changes is his relationship with it. Instead of running from it or suppressing it or letting it consume him, he learns to coexist with it. He learns that you can carry pain and still move forward. That you can acknowledge the darkness inside you without becoming it. This is what's called integration in psychology. It's when you stop fighting parts of yourself and instead accept them as part of your whole identity. Naruto stops trying to separate himself from the Nine Tails, stops seeing it as this foreign entity. He starts to understand that the fox's rage is his rage. His pain is his pain. And by accepting that, by integrating those shadow aspects of himself, he gains real control. Not through suppression but through acceptance. And this is the turning point where Naruto stops being a victim of his circumstances and becomes someone who can genuinely heal, not just himself but others. The village's acceptance after he saves them, it matters. But it doesn't fill the void the way he thought it would. Because by this point, Naruto has learned that external validation, no matter how much he craved it, was never going to fix what was broken inside him. The healing had to come from within. From self-acceptance. From understanding that his worth wasn't determined by what he could do for others or how many people acknowledged him. His worth was inherent. He mattered because he existed, not because he proved himself. And that's a lesson that most people spend their entire lives trying to learn. Naruto had to nearly destroy himself and everyone around him to figure it out. The village starts calling him a hero. Kids look up to him. People who once crossed the street to avoid him now want to shake his hand. And there's a part of him that feels vindicated. That feels like finally, I matter. But there's another part, the part that's been through hell and back, that knows this acceptance is conditional too. They love him because he saved them. But would they have loved him if he hadn't? Would they have accepted him if he'd been weak? If he'd failed? That question lingers. And it's a question that stays with him even as he becomes more and more recognized as a hero. The war arc brings even more challenges. Fighting Obito, fighting Madara, these aren't just physical battles. They're psychological warfare. Because both Obito and Madara are showing Naruto different versions of what happens when you can't overcome that void. Obito gave up on reality and tried to create a dream world where pain doesn't exist. Madara decided that peace through fear was the only answer. Both of them looked at the suffering in the world and concluded that hope was naive. That the cycle couldn't be broken. And they're trying to convince Naruto of the same thing. They're saying, look around you, look at all the death, all the hatred, all the pain, this is reality, your idealism is childish, give up. And there are moments, multiple moments during the war where Naruto almost does. Where he looks at the bodies piling up, at his friends getting hurt, at the sheer scale of destruction, and thinks maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just delaying the inevitable. Maybe the world really is too broken to fix. But then he remembers Jiraiya. He remembers Nagato. He remembers every person who ever showed him kindness when they didn't have to. And he decides that even if the world is broken, even if the cycle seems endless, giving up isn't an option. Not because he's naive, but because someone has to keep trying. Someone has to believe that change is possible. And if nobody else will, then it'll be him. So let's talk about what happens after. After the war. After he becomes Hokage. After he gets everything he ever said he wanted. Because here's the thing that most people don't want to acknowledge. Trauma doesn't just disappear when your circumstances change. The void doesn't magically get filled because you achieved your dreams. And for Naruto, even with all his success, even with the village's love, even with a family of his own, that scar is still there. It's quieter now. It's manageable. But it never fully heals. You see it in Boruto. You see it in how Naruto overworks himself to the point of exhaustion. How he's always trying to be there for everyone, always saying yes to every request, always pushing himself beyond his limits. That's not just dedication. That's compensation. That's the little kid inside him still trying to prove he deserves the love he's receiving. Still terrified that if he stops being useful, if he stops being the hero, people will remember who he used to be. The outcast. The monster. The kid nobody wanted. And they'll leave. There's this heartbreaking scene in Boruto where Naruto misses Himawari's birthday because of work. And when he gets called out for it, when his family is hurt and disappointed, you can see it in his eyes. That old fear creeping back in. The fear that he's failing, that he's not enough, that he's letting people down. And the worst part is he doesn't know how to balance it. He doesn't know how to say no. Because saying no, setting boundaries, prioritizing his own needs, those are things you learn from healthy childhood relationships. From parents who teach you that your value isn't tied to your productivity. And Naruto never had that. He had to raise himself. He had to figure out everything on his own. So even as an adult, even as Hokage, he still has these maladaptive coping mechanisms. He still measures his worth by what he can do for others. He still struggles with the idea that he's allowed to rest, that he's allowed to put himself first sometimes, that he's allowed to just exist without constantly proving he deserves to. And his relationship with Boruto, man, that's where the intergenerational trauma really shows up. Naruto loves his son desperately. Like, would die for him without hesitation. But he doesn't know how to show it in the ways Boruto needs. Because Naruto's love language is sacrifice. It's I'll work myself to death to give you a better life than I had. It's I'll protect this village so you can grow up safe. But Boruto doesn't need grand gestures. He needs presence. He needs his dad to show up. To be there. And Naruto struggles with that because in his mind, being there for the village is being there for his family. He can't separate the two. And when Boruto acts out, when he spray paints the Hokage faces or talks back or complains about not getting attention, there's a part of Naruto that doesn't understand. Because Boruto has everything Naruto never had. A family. A home. Acceptance. So why isn't that enough? Why is he still unhappy? But here's what Naruto doesn't realize, or maybe he does and it's too painful to admit, you can't give someone what you never received yourself. Naruto never had a father to teach him how to be one. He never had someone model healthy emotional availability. So he's doing his best, but his best is shaped by his trauma. He's parenting from a place of lack, trying to fill his son's cup while his own is still cracked and leaking. And that's not a criticism. That's just the reality of how trauma works. It gets passed down. Not because you want it to. Not because you don't love your kids. But because you can't teach what you don't know. You can't give what you never got. And watching Naruto struggle with this, watching him try so hard to be a good father while simultaneously being haunted by the ghost of that lonely little kid he used to be, it's genuinely heartbreaking. Because you can see how much he's grown, how far he's come, and yet how some wounds never fully close. The void he carried, the emptiness that defined his entire childhood, it shaped everything about who he became. His strengths and his weaknesses. His ability to empathize with anyone, even his enemies, came from that pain. His unwavering determination came from that pain. His belief that nobody should ever feel alone came from that pain. But so did his inability to set boundaries. So did his self-sacrificing tendencies. So did his workaholism. So did his struggle to accept love without feeling like he has to earn it. That's the complexity of trauma. It destroys parts of you, but it also builds parts of you. And you can't separate the two. Naruto wouldn't be the person he is without that suffering, but he also wouldn't have those specific struggles if he hadn't gone through it. It's a paradox. A painful, complicated paradox that he'll carry for the rest of his life. And here's the thing that really gets me, Naruto's story is presented as a triumph. As a hero's journey. And it is. But it's also a tragedy. Because no amount of success, no amount of recognition, no amount of love can undo what was done to him. You can heal. You can grow. You can build a beautiful life. But the scars remain. The void gets smaller, but it never disappears completely. There will always be days where it whispers to him. Days where he feels like that lonely kid again. Days where he wonders if he's doing enough, if he matters enough, if people would care if he wasn't there. Those intrusive thoughts don't just vanish because you saved the world. They're wired into your neural pathways. They're part of your story. And all you can do is learn to recognize them for what they are, echoes of old pain, not reflections of current reality, and choose not to let them control you. So when people say Naruto's message is never give up, they're only seeing half of it. The real message is deeper. It's that you can survive unimaginable pain and still choose kindness. You can carry scars and still choose to heal others. You can be broken and still be whole. You can acknowledge the darkness inside you and still choose the light. That's what makes Naruto's story so powerful. Not that he overcame his trauma because he didn't fully overcome it, nobody does, but that he learned to live with it. To integrate it. To let it be part of his story without letting it be the whole story. He took the worst parts of his life, the rejection, the loneliness, the monster inside him, and he transformed them into his greatest strengths. His empathy. His determination. His refusal to give up on people. That's the real victory. Not becoming Hokage. Not being recognized. But becoming someone who can look at his pain and say, you didn't destroy me, you made me who I am, and I choose to use that to make the world better. But here's what we need to talk about, and this is the part that haunts me. What if Naruto hadn't met Iruka? What if Jiraiya hadn't believed in him? What if Kakashi hadn't seen his potential? What if, at any point, those connections hadn't happened? Where would he be? The answer is terrifying because we've seen it. We've seen what happens to kids like Naruto when nobody saves them. They become Gaara before he met Naruto. They become Sasuke after he left the village. They become Obito after Rin died. They become Pain. They become the villains. Not because they were born evil, but because pain without connection, without validation, without hope, it curdles into hatred. It becomes destruction. And Naruto was always one bad day, one more rejection, one more loss away from that same path. The fact that he didn't take it wasn't just willpower. It was luck. It was timing. It was the grace of having people intervene at critical moments. And that's a sobering thought. Because it means there are countless other kids out there in the real world, carrying that same void, wearing that same smile, one moment away from either healing or breaking, and whether they get the help they need is often just chance. Naruto's void, the one he hid behind his smile, the one that almost destroyed everything, it's not really about Naruto. It's about all of us. It's about recognizing that pain in ourselves and others. It's about understanding that the loudest person in the room might be screaming for help. That the person who's always smiling might be barely holding it together. That kindness, validation, connection, these aren't just nice things, they're lifelines. They're the difference between someone becoming a hero or becoming a cautionary tale. Naruto's story is a mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we try to hide. The loneliness we don't admit. The inadequacy we feel. The fear that we're not enough. And maybe, just maybe, by seeing ourselves in his struggle, we can start to heal our own voids. Or at the very least, recognize them in others and offer the connection that might save them. Now, if this deep dive into Naruto psychology hit you as hard as I think it did, you need to check out our next video where we break down Sasuke's descent into darkness and why his path was actually way more dangerous than anyone realized. We're talking about the psychology of revenge, how trauma can rewire your entire identity, and why Sasuke's story is a masterclass in what happens when you let pain consume you. It's gonna blow your mind even more than this one. Plus, we've got breakdowns on other characters like Itachi's impossible choice, Kakashi's survivor's guilt, and Gaara's transformation from monster to protector. Every single one of these videos digs deep into the psychology that makes these characters so real, so relatable, so unforgettable. So do yourself a favor, click that next video, keep this journey going, because once you start seeing anime through this lens, through the psychological depth behind the fights and jutsu, you can't unsee it. And trust me, you're gonna want more. Let's keep unpacking these stories together. I'll see you in the next one.